Welcome to the Bottom Line Podcast with Nicholas Kuzmich, where we discuss what matters most, the bottom line, featuring the top minds in their industry. Now, let's get started.
Hey everybody, Nicholas Kuzmich here from the Bottom Line Podcast, where I connect with industry leaders and what I might call industry sleepers to discuss what matters most, and that is the bottom line. And what I mean by that, of course, is not just bottom line profits, but it's actually the bottom line, like what matters most to these individuals and to life in general. So past guests have included people like Arash Vasugi, founder of Boss Coaching Co., Robbie from Scaling with Systems, and so many more, all of which you can listen to however you listen to podcasts on the interwebs. Now, this message or this podcast is brought to you by H2H Media Group, a company that I founded where we help high-ticket businesses create qualified leads without funnels and have generated close to $1 billion in sales over the last decade. And the question I always like to ask is, you wouldn't sell a McLaren like you would a Mazda, would you? Well, of course not. So if you want to learn more, go to nicholaskuzmich.com. Before introducing today's guest, I want to give a big shout out. Well, first, I guess to Netflix, James, because that's how I first came across you. Because I like to give a shout out to whoever introduced our guest. That's where I first learned about you. I saw the docu. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then to my good friend Dan Martell, because we just happened to be in Utah at the time. We just so happened to connect at that time, and that's how I was able to meet you, James. So Dan is an elite business coach, and if you want to learn more, go to danmartell.com. But James, man, I call you the baddest man on the planet, the Iron Cowboy. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad to have this conversation with you.
Awesome, man. Thanks, Nicholas. Glad to be here. And again, thank you, Dan, for connecting us. That dude's a stud. And then, Netflix is always super powerful.
It's helpful.
It's amazing to me to watch the landscape and, being on certain podcasts or certain shows, the impact or ripple effect that the significant ones really have. Like when you can actually feel that influence, if you would, influence that those platforms have. And Netflix is definitely one of those. A lot of fun.
Yes, actually, maybe we'll talk about that, the whole Netflix thing. Because I don't think it's any easy feat to get on Netflix. And obviously it was been a great driver for creating publicity and what it is that you do at Iron Cowboy. We'll get to that in just a second. But hey, I'm jumping a little bit ahead because I think I told you, I don't really like reading these biographies and saying, hey, this is who someone is and it's canned. And everyone said that every time you get on stage, someone reads it for you. So I'm going to turn it around to you and let you do the hard work. And if you were to give an elevator pitch, and hell, it doesn't even need to be an elevator pitch. It could be as long or as short as you want, because it's going to lead me to a bunch of questions anyways. But in your own words, if you had to introduce yourself, how would you do that? Well, who are you? What do you do? And tell us a little bit about your company.
Yeah, if I was to visit my younger self 20 years ago and said, this is what you would be doing and who you became, I'd have told you flat out, just never have thought. And I think it just goes to the point of dreaming big, which is what I do, and then allowing the ebbs and flows of the journey to allow you to take it and not be too rigid on how you're getting there. But right. I grew up in Canada, Calgary, Alberta.
Yeah, fellow Canadian.
There you go. Grew up going to the Stampede and all that stuff. In fact, a funny story I love to tell is I was in a contest where I sat on the Ferris wheel for 10 days. The Midway Marathon. It was before I even got into marathoning and stuff. It was called the Midway Marathon to see who could sit in boredom with their thoughts.
Oh,
and
gosh.
In the contest, I sat on the Ferris wheel for 10 days. And it was really the first time that I tapped into my upbringing as an athlete and as a wrestler and developed a lot of mental toughness. But in that competition, I just really found that I had control over my mind. And I was okay just sitting there with my thoughts.
Right.
And opportunity, moved to the States, met my wife, got married. We're actually celebrating. We leave Monday. We're going to Spain. We're celebrating 24 years of marriage. We've got 5 kids.
Wow.
And our family's been on an incredible journey that had a very humble beginning. I'm known as, not my words, one of the greatest endurance athletes in history. Based on our accomplishments and what we've done over the past 15 years. But few people know, like they've tuned into that story, right?
Sure.
But few people know that on Thanksgiving morning, many years ago, my wife said, hey, let's do the local 4-mile fun run. Okay. And I'm like, sweet, let's do it. And so we showed up and I suffered through a 4-mile fun run to the point where afterwards my wife said, hey, Do you remember the moment in the race when the women pushing their kids in strollers were passing you?
Oh
And you,
man, no way.
and then she followed it up with, and you're pathetic. I just signed you up for the Salt Lake City Marathon. Figure it out.
No
And
kidding.
so that's how this whole thing started. And then
Wild.
suffered through that marathon, hated it. And then it was during Lance's heyday. And a buddy said, "Hey, it's the last day of the Tour de France." And I'm like, I grew up in Canada. What's the Tour de France?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
I go to his house, I watch the final day. It was super exciting and all this buzz about Lance. And he's like, "Oh, I do this thing called triathlon. Do you want to try it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I don't know how to swim. I need to find a bike, but let's do it." And so I dove into the sport, fell in love with the community, fell in love with cycling, and just the challenge of figuring out strength training, cycling, swimming,
Bring it all
running,
together.
and all of it. And it was just this real fun time in our lives. And my wife and I were doing it together. And one thing led to another. And I owned a mortgage company, and then economic crash happened,
Right.
and we lost everything.
Wow.
And then it put us on this endurance journey I was now at that time coaching athletes and being a personal trainer. And I was like, okay, I'm an entrepreneur. How do I separate myself from the competition?
Right.
Hey, what's the world record for the most half Ironmans? What's the world record for the most full Ironmans? And then it put us on this crazy journey to now, like if I was just to list out a few of our accomplishments, it would be biked across America, ran across Greece, rode our mountain bikes to the top of Kilimanjaro, 30 Ironmans in 1 year, all official events through 11 countries,
Oh
50,
God.
50 days, 50 states, 100 consecutive Ironmans, two-time author, two-time uh,
Documentary.
yeah, documentary.
Yeah.
What I'm looking for. Whatever. It's the person that's in the document. Whatever.
Yeah. Documentary subject.
It's a subject. That's what it is. The
Yeah.
subject of two documentaries.
Yeah.
I've spoken in 56 countries around the world.
Yeah.
Full time doing that. Coach. We put on events. So there you go. There's your huge, massive intro to our journey.
Wild.
And I'm sure that prompted one, maybe two questions.
Yeah, tons. Which we'll get into in just a second. I like the fact, if I'm not mistaken, we'll come back to this, of Iron Cowboy is the result of your wife getting you into a fun run. Like literally,
Yeah.
that was the beginning of it all.
Yes, a now multi-million-dollar brand started with a very humbling 4 mile fun run.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to talk about in just a second was the fact that it was spawned by saying, "I'm a trainer. How do I stand out? Let me just think about the hardest things I can ever do and break every record known to man, and then I'll stand out as a trainer." Like, I think that's one way to market it that no one really thinks about. But before we get there, I always start the podcast with a random question from this question deck. So my good friend Jason Gaynard, founder of Mastermind Talks, created a conversation deck because he believes every good conversation is the result of a good question that's asked. So are you okay if I randomly pick a card and see what it says and you got to answer it?
Yeah. And I also need his contact information because I love this idea.
Oh, he's a legend in the space. In fact, it's the reason why myself and Dan and all these guys have met through his thing. I think you'd be a great person to be a part of that. So let's see here. This is a great question. If we were meeting a year from today with a bottle of champagne, what are we celebrating and why is it important to you?
Wow, that is a great question.
It's a great
And
question.
Relevant because we are doing a massive push. We talked about that a little bit before going on air in terms of business. A year from now, we actually this Saturday, I'm going to the Emmys for our new documentary. So we'll be celebrating.
So good.
We'll be celebrating the Emmy. That'll be cool. We're going to be celebrating our New York Times bestseller of our new book, Iron Hope. For sure, we're going to be celebrating our mindset course that we're launching in the new year. We're going to be celebrating our fitness and training app that we're launching. We're going to be celebrating the fact that I'll probably be a grandfather by then. I got 2 daughters.
Yeah, crazy.
I mean, there's probably 10 other things that we'll be celebrating that I don't even know yet, but those are top of mind that are all going to happen.
Oh, I love it. And I will make a point in this recording and I will come to you or we'll meet somehow with a bottle of champagne after all those things happen. Because if someone's going to do it, it's going to be you, for goodness sake. So,
well, hey, I don't know if you heard, but Dan and I are racing each other in June in Mont Tremblant. You should come along. It's going to be.
I definitely won't be racing, but I'll be coming along.
Dan and I are going to race the 70.3 in Mont Tremblant.
Oh, that's wild. That's wild.
June
Um,
20th on your calendar.
I will, because I think that'd be fun. I love Tremblant. June's a perfect time to go rather than the cold, so that's great. Yeah, we already talked. I was going to ask, like, start with a little bit of history, and maybe we do need to rewind just a little bit to provide people context. Because again, you're known as the Iron Cowboy, partially because you started running races with a cowboy hat, which I love, and that goes back to your like Calgary roots. You already talked a little bit about the fact that
Actually, it's not my Calgary
oh, it's
roots.
not.
No,
Where
and
did
that's what a
cowboy
lot of
hat come from?
exactly because Calgary is known as Cowtown
Yeah.
because of the Stampede, largest rodeo in the world. So no, what happened is Ironman racing is the least friendly spectator sport on the planet.
Okay.
And like it's 140 miles,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
Or 220K. And so if you've got little kids, it's a long day to spectate. And when I first started racing, man, my kids were like 10 to 4
Right.
or even younger. And so my kids spent time making signs, go dad, go, and decorate all these things. I got 4 daughters. And
Yeah.
so they would come to the race and they'd be holding up their sign. Well, 9 times out of 10, we all look the same as athletes out there.
True.
We're suffering and we're having a difficult time. I would miss my kids.
Right.
And I need that energy exchange. They wanted to cheer dad on. And so
Yeah.
it always ended up being this disaster. And so my wife or someone said, hey, why don't you just wear a cowboy hat? And yes, it was from Canada and Calgary and
Sure.
the Stampede. They were like, why don't you wear a cowboy hat? Nobody's wearing a cowboy hat.
So the girls
And
can
then
see you.
see you coming way down the road. And so then I started to wear a cowboy hat during the marathon portion of the race,
Ah.
during the first world record where we did 20 half Ironmans in a year. And the public just started saying, oh, there's the Iron Cowboy, there's the Iron Cowboy. And so it turned into this. In fact, if you look at our logo,
Yeah.
when I was racing, I used to have a big beard. The bottom of it is my beard,
Got
and
it.
the top is the cowboy hat.
Okay.
And then if you turn it sideways, it's an I and a C, Iron Cowboy.
No way. Oh, I dig it. Oh my God. I had no idea. What a great
Yeah.
idea. And I'm glad it was a cowboy hat rather than like Borat's mankini or something just to see dad.
Well, and here's the funniest part about the whole thing is I'm allergic to horses and hay.
Okay.
But here's a better look at that logo. So the bottom
I
part,
love that.
the top part, and then
The
IC for
IC. Yeah. Oh, so
So a
good.
lot of thought and intentionality went into that logo.
I like it a lot. I mean, so you're known as Iron Cowboy. You are a world-renowned speaker, 2 times author, 2 times documentary subject, endurance athlete, to say the least. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. 2 times Guinness Book of World Records holder. Sports Illustrated ranked you top 50 fittest freaks in company with LeBron James and Conor McGregor. You may have alluded to this. Like the question was originally going to be like, how did this start? And some of it was your wife egging you on to join this fun run. It sounded like you had something inside of you that caused you to sit on the damn Ferris wheel for 10 days. Like maybe that was the origin, but do you just have different DNA or like how did what part of James Lawrence is allowing you to do what you're doing today?
Man, there's actually a lot to unpack there.
Okay.
They convinced me I was special after the 50. They were like, that was impossible. Couldn't be done. You're different genetically.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm totally normal. And they're like, nope, that's not possible. There's something unique about you. So,
And so
okay, cool.
before you even go on that, like, do you fundamentally believe that either A, you're normal, or B, anyone can do what you do?
I'm normal. Anyone can do what I do.
Jesus. Okay. We're going to have to talk about that. But anyways, continue.
So I had every genetic test done, epigenetics, genetics, genetic markers, anything special, anything unique, anything different, anything elevated, nothing, nada, zero things. I joke and I tell people all the time, I'm an average white Canadian.
That's so wild. Okay.
Nothing in there that do it. And then, so for me, a lot of people, when they hear my story, they're like, oh, you were addicted to drugs and alcohol, or you were abused as a child. And all these things, and I'm running from my past traumas because there's a lot of people that do endurance racing for addiction transfer, which is great.
Sure.
And I mean, there's a group here locally that's called Addicts to Athletes, and it's a phenomenal program.
Oh, cool.
Providing an outlet for these individuals that really struggled with that addiction of drugs and alcohol or whatever it was, or depression or all these things, because it's phenomenal for that kind of thing. And I was always so confused because I had a great upbringing, right? And I don't have a lot of that major trauma. Like we all have our like
We all have
unique
little T's. Yeah.
little things, but nothing like on the grand scale that's like, okay, these are major traumas. Like I didn't have any of that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had to like step back and analyze, okay, one, why does everybody think that? And two, why is that not the thing that's driving me?
Wow.
And I finally came to the conclusion that I'm not running from anything. I'm chasing human potential. And
Yeah. That's
that's
awesome.
what and that's what keeps pushing me. I joke all the time that I don't break records, I set new standards.
Mm.
And I think that's what drives me. And it's interesting that a lot of people don't know this because they're a couple dudes in Europe. My 100 has been broken.
Okay.
Uh,
I didn't know that.
and yeah, and I'll tell you right now, it doesn't impact me at all. In fact, I love it. And the best analogy that I can throw on the table here is the 4 minute mile.
Yeah. Right. Bannister.
And
Sure.
Bannister, nobody could do it. It's impossible. Humans can't run that fast. He does it, and what happens right after?
Yeah. Yeah.
Multiple people break
All
it,
over the
and
place. Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah.
As soon as Bannister did it, like I think it was within a month,
It's
another
like he
guy did
gave
it.
people permission almost.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so I am honored to be the first
Mm.
person to do
Mm.
that standard so high, and all of a sudden, two, three guys go out and do it
Wild.
because I don't break records. I set new standards, and other people chase that standard. And so that's a really great place for
I love
me
that.
in the history of it. I set a new standard that nobody thought was possible. But it is such a valuable lesson and point here to anybody, no matter what industry you're in.
Yeah.
Don't compare yourself to what everybody else is doing. Because to me, the current standard of excellence is really bad.
Right.
Like,
Too low.
like the kids today, you show up and you're ahead of the class, which is tragic. To even that's a thing. Like I've heard like Dana White say, like, dude, you just have to like moderately try, and you can be a dog in today's landscape. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so for me, that's really what it became. I'm not running from anything. I was chasing potentials. I'm setting new standards. Because
Mm.
when I first started doing this stuff, like the most anybody had done was 5 consecutive.
Yeah. Isn't that
And
crazy?
totally. And then I said, well, I'm going to do 30 in a year. And they're like, dude,
Yeah.
you
Slow
know, the
down.
record is 20. If you did 21, you'd be a new world record holder.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm not trying to break the record. I'm trying to set a new standard. I'm not comparing myself to what they did. I'm comparing it to what I believe is possible. And
Oh,
that's what
wild.
I'm struggling with, is they're limiting their belief system because they're out there on social media looking at what
Yeah.
everybody's doing and all this comparison game. And two things happen. One, they reach that standard, and that's the best they do.
Yeah.
Or they're paralyzed in fear because they're too scared to start because they're not the coach, the expert on day one, which is another whole topic that we can dive into. But that's kind of to long answer to your question of
No,
why I do what I do.
I love that. And I guess then asked another way, like when you look at all the greats, like all the documentaries, whatever, the Michael Jordans, the LeBron James, the anybody who's notable in any sport or anything that anyone looks up to, there is a couple things that are true, and you could probably speak this way better than I could. But one is like a fierce level of competition. Like I don't like losing, I want to win. That seems to be something. But more importantly, and something that you alluded to was whether there's a lack of or the ability to overcome limiting beliefs. Because most people would just look out in the world and say 21 marathons, fuck that. Like no chance. And you would look at that and say, I wonder what's a standard that I could set that regardless of the 21 number, like, were you always like that? Was that since the beginning? Did someone impart that into you? Where do you, and I don't just mean in a bad way, but I almost want to ask, like, where do you have the audacity to feel like you can set standards? Because most people don't. And so how does one train that or pick it up or whatever it is to start breaking past the limiting beliefs that are holding them back?
Yeah, again, great question. I think children and people are products of their environments.
Right.
And our belief system stems from our upbringing, our church, our school, whatever our surroundings were. And as we break out of our shells and the at-home environment and start going to the real world, we now have an opportunity, and I think it's everybody's responsibility to start to be curious and to questions and to discover and find out. And what I've discovered on my journey is there's 8 billion people in the world
Yeah.
and 8 billion different perspectives. And there's going to be 10,000 people that watch this. I have no idea. And 10,000 people are going to take something different because of where they are on their journey
True.
and life experiences that have brought them to this moment. And so I grew up in a great home in Canada. My dad was a blue collar firefighter worker, and he taught me how to work hard. And then I had this grandmother who immigrated from Poland, and she was a firecracker. And she was my original example of a true entrepreneur that knew how to dream.
Huh.
And I took my dad's ability to really work
Work
hard,
hard.
turn his mind off, and just do that blue collar work. And then my grandmother's ability to dream massive. She came to this country with nothing and
Yeah.
built
Got
an
it.
network marketing space, and was the #1 distributor in Canada for 30 years.
Wow.
And well under her 90s was pulling a huge check. And so I looked at both of these and I went, my gosh,
Huh.
I can if I can, because I didn't like the just work hard for 40 years, take a pension, and that's the ceiling. And then I looked at my grandma and she was like, she really got me into The Secret and manifesting and Les Brown tapes. And
Yeah.
I'd go to
Wow.
bed listening to these motivational cassettes and like really doing that. And then I started to go on this development journey, changing my belief system and my perspective on what's possible for me. And it just has put me on this path of like, man, I get to wake up every single day and be, create whatever I want because I get to choose how I live and show up. I love the way the mind works is, dude, I don't like the word lie to yourself, but like create any dang world you want in your
Sure.
head.
Right.
Because it's the only thing that matters is how you perceive, interact, and engage with the world around you.
Yeah.
And we all get to choose how we show up in our lives and how we choose to react to what's said or what's done or any of that. We get to choose.
So we get to say, would you say then, we also get to choose our narratives, right? Because everything's a story and we just get to choose, I'm going to believe this story or that story. And if one story says you can't do this, but the other story says you can do this, and not that one is right or one is wrong, it's they're both right or they're both wrong, depending on whether or not you're going to accept and embody that story as your reality.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, people try to validate their belief systems.
Yes.
They
Right.
attract whatever
Right.
situation is required to validate that belief.
Yeah. The cognitive bias. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm a huge fan of Survivor. I've been watching it since day one.
Yeah.
And I get so frustrated every season at the beginning. It like weeds out the mentally weak, and you can instantly spot the victims or the people that can't control their thought patterns, or my favorite word, they catastrophize and they start to spiral. Like
Yeah.
you can see it instantly. I just started watching the new episode. I'm like 8 episodes behind, but there was a guy literally episode 1, and he's like, nobody likes me on my tribe. Everybody hates me. And he just started like drawing these parallels in his life. And he
Yeah.
started doing really ridiculous things. And I'm like,
Wow.
from the outside looking in, I'm like, you are just trying to prove your belief system into reality.
Right.
And the other people around him are like, no, dude, nobody ever
Yeah, we're
said
good.
you're just creating this own narrative in your head. And I think it's what a lot of people do. But a lot of times it's not their fault. And it's just how they were brought and again, the environment that they were in. So I want to challenge anybody listening to this right now. You have a unique opportunity. We live in an amazing day and age and
Right.
time.
Right.
Amazing. We're not in the day and age where we don't have knowledge or information flow. You can change the way you see the world. You can change. Your brain is completely malleable. If you don't like your surrounding, the way you're integrated in your life, like you have an opportunity. We live in a very free country, Canada and the United States. Like, move, get up and move and change.
Right.
Every single one of you has that, and it is a pure gift. If you are, if you're choosing to tolerate something right now, then my empathy goes way down because you have a choice.
And that's what it is. Yeah.
And with that said, it's not easy because a lot of people are like, oh, I can just move to another city and get a new job. And no, there's going to be struggle and adversity and challenges. But again, that's the whole point in life. Like that's how you grow and change and evolve. Like it's through challenge and adversity. Yeah, complacency is super easy.
Yep.
You get to choose your hard. It's either going to be hard getting to greatness, or you can stay mediocre and life's just flat out going to be hard.
And I love that. And the point you made that is greatness is a choice, but the path isn't. Like the path is work. The path is, you can get there, but you can't get there complacently, correct?
I think it's Les Brown that said everybody's, jealous of the view at the top, but not jealous or envious of the work that it takes to get there.
Yeah, I love that.
It was recently most probably famously for quoting it, but I think it's originally Les Brown's.
Yeah, yeah. So
The OG.
the OG, where I first came across your work was a Netflix documentary where you decided to do the 50-50-50, right? 50 Ironman, which by the way, I didn't even fully understand what an Ironman was until I watched that. I was like, oh, like you bike, you swim, you run, and then they put the miles behind it, and you're like, oh shit, like this is.
So an Ironman is a triathlon, swim, bike, run.
Yeah.
Multiple distances of triathlon. Ironman is a brand of the longest distance in triathlon. It consists of a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, which is 180K, and a 26.2 full marathon run, which is 42K. So it's a total of 140.6 miles or 220 kilometers. NBC Sports calls it the single hardest day in sports.
Makes sense.
And when I saw that World Championships on TV, I was like, ooh, that's incredible. I want to find out my limits. I just want to do one. And so I got a program, I found it, I followed it, showed up, got my butt handed to me, and I was like, man, I can do that better.
Wow.
And so that's when I started going that journey. So we ended up doing 50 Ironmans, 50 days, 50 states. That's consecutive. So Ironman during the day, 14 to 17 hours, travel to the next state, figure it out.
Yeah, and I know you were saying how logistically it was difficult. I mean, the hardest part wasn't the 50, it was 50 in 50 states, over 50 days, because there's a logistical nightmare of trying to make that work. But was the kickstart to that, like there's a twofold question. One is this the moment where you're like, okay, I'm a trainer, I want to see what the records are, let's do something crazy, and you set out to do this? Like, is that the motivation initially to try to do this? And then B, how the hell does Netflix get involved, and how does this become now a thing where you're not just doing this for branding and marketing and saying, I want to show you that I'm a better trainer than that guy or whatever. How do I stand out? But now it's becoming a phenomenon. People are watching. It's big industries looking at you and saying, is he going to do this? Like, how did those two things come about?
Yeah, so for us, with me trying to grow my coaching platform, it was the world record for the half Ironmans in a year, and then the world record for the full Ironmans.
Right.
And that one was 30 Ironmans for 11 countries, all official events. And that was right when, so that was in 2012, 10 and 12. We just lost everything in the economic crash of 08.
Yeah, right.
And then so we were just like, okay, this is, you hear the phrase burn the ships, and then that really makes you go after your dreams. I don't really prescribe to that, because I'm like, rule number one in my books is put food on the table and provide for yourself, and chase your dreams in the midnight oil until the dream replaces the foundation that you need to survive in this world. But for me, proverbially, my ships were burnt for me.
Anyways, yeah.
It was really an opportunity to take some risks and hit the reset button. And so I'd already established my coaching career with those first two world records. And then at this point, it was like, okay, now what's possible? And I'll tell you how the 50 was born. The real OG, aside from Terry Fox, who is the OG of OGs,
sure,
in doing this kind of thing, is a guy named Dean Karnassus, and he's known as the ultra marathon man. He did 50 marathons in 50 days in 50 states. And I'm watching because social media was still getting new and all that. And I'm watching Good Morning America, and Dean's on there. And I'm like, there's a book about him. I'm like, ooh, he wrote a book. Cool. I read the book. And he's doing all these really cool things and being, influential. And I'm like, dude, if he's getting that type of influence and impact, or having that kind of influence and impact, because that's always been a dream of mine. It's like, and it is with other people. It's cliche, and I hate even the words come out of my mouth, but like, I really want to help people.
Sure.
I really want to be encourager. I believe in community. I believe in rising to the top together. And so I thought, man, if he did that with marathons, what on earth would happen if I pulled that off with an Ironman?
Right.
Because there was a shirt going around. These aren't my words. Calm down, culture, society, for a second. there was a shirt that said, "Oh, you ran a marathon. That's cute." And then it said 140.6 on the bottom. And so I immediately thought of that shirt and I was like, "Oh, that's cute. Imagine if I did it with
Yeah,
a
yeah,
marathon."
yeah, right.
So, so we had just, I actually came up with the concept on race 27 of 30 in that world record. And so
Yeah.
my gears are turning because we'd already broken the world record. We're doing victory laps. We're gaining momentum. We're building confidence. And that's when, so then it took me 2.5 years to plan logistically and put everything together for the 50. And now at this point, it's changed from, trying to build my coaching business to, okay, now I understand personal branding and
Right.
money for charities and all these different things. And so now it's the evolution that has happened on our journey that was just organic in terms of like showing up, chasing a passion, living a dream, pushing boundaries and limits. Social media was just on the rise. Like, I mean, this will date when we did the 50. The only live streaming platform was Periscope on Twitter.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all that was. They were the leading charge at that time. And then Instagram came, Facebook was big, and then Instagram came out afterwards, and we started to build our presence there. But that's really the kind of the transition from being a coach and then into this world. And then I feel 50, and man, calls every day. Will you come speak? Come tell their story. And I'm like,
Yeah, right.
I'm not a speaker. And they're like, hey, do you have a book? And I'm like, what? No. And then in my head, I'm like, oh, this was the plan. And then I had to figure it out. We wrote our book, Redefine Impossible. We sold over 100,000 copies of it. And
Oh,
that's
so good.
easy for a self-publisher, first-time author.
Yeah.
And the documentary, we just got a film crew, scraped up some money to just film this thing, got an editor. They did sweat equity. I've never seen a dime off that documentary, by the way, because
Sure.
everything that came into it was to pay off the
Yeah.
sweat equity.
Not directly anyways. Yeah.
Exactly. Good. I'm
Yeah.
glad. Post-production, super, super expensive. And then I started speaking in from post 50 for the next 5 years. I did close to 80 to 100 events a year. And I've now spoken in over 56 countries worldwide. And then so people are like, well, how did the 100 happen? So if you watch the documentary, which is now on Amazon Prime, about the 50-50, and you read the book, Redefine Impossible, we are fully open on the table about mistakes that we made in the journey. We had no idea what we're doing. We were heavily criticized
because no one else had done it.
Nobody had done it. We were the pioneers in this type of thing with Ironmans. And so we were heavily criticized, but it didn't matter because we pivoted, we adapted, we evolved, we continued on. The purpose was for charity, all these things.
Yeah.
And finishing the 50, get pushed into this crazy world of being an author and a speaker and all these things. But I'd always had that, like, just that little tiny voice in the back of my head being like, well, you made that mistake. And so I'm kind of wired in a way that, like, I always want to do it better.
Sure.
I want to learn from my past, because if you make a mistake and do nothing about it, it's a failure. If you make a mistake, pause, have some intellectual intelligence, evaluate it, and then come out better and stronger, it's no longer a failure. It was a learning opportunity.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, I want to redo the 50, but I was like, I never want to do the 50 again, because it was 5 years later, 6 years later, my kids are older, we're established, they're in high school, all these different things. Like, it was just not realistic to displace our family again and do it across the country. And originally, I always wanted to find out, man, how many consecutive Ironmans can the human body really do? Like, what is that number? And I only settled on 50 because it was kind of the challenge that was placed in front of us by Dean, and there's only 50 states.
Yeah,
and
right,
so
right. It worked out.
It worked out. That became the challenge. And then when the pandemic hit, no speaking, no coaching, no racing, like most people, but my calendar in 48 hours, I'm talking wiped clean. And I'm like, immediately I was like, this is it. This is the opportunity. My chance to reset my own history.
Wow.
And not prove to anybody else, but prove to myself that what we did the first time we could do again.
Yeah.
And so, I didn't want to do the 50 again. I knew my concept and belief was, okay, if I can remove chaos, confusion, logistics, if I can put systems and team in place, could we double what everybody said was impossible? Could we defy logic? And so we started to work on that. And we put this together in 4 months. I was out of shape. I was very far removed from my most physical competitive set.
Yeah.
And literally prepared 4 months for this with sponsors, logistic, and I mean, just cranked as hard as I could and started March 1st, 2021, and then ultimately ended up doing 100 consecutive Ironmans to perfection, broke my own world record, got to reset my own history to my satisfaction. And so many crazy things happened in that. This is why we're so excited about the new documentary that we're going to the Emmys for this week. It's on Amazon. Also, our new book, Iron Hope. And really that's the evolution of how all of that happened.
So many things I want to ask. Well, I just love the fact that after the Conquer 100 was done, you decided on the next day not to take a break and just do one more for the hell of it. So it's really 101 for those who haven't watched the film yet. By the way, go watch the film. First, I guess, and it's as concise as you can, because I know you could probably talk about this for hours. What are the lessons learned from doing 100 in 100 days? Like, what? There's lessons that I feel can only be learned doing that than any other way. What are some unique things that stand out as lessons to you from that, the 50 or the 100 experience?
Yeah, the biggest one, the most glaring one to me is nothing great is ever accomplished on our own. And we're only as great as a team. And my goal in life now is not to get to the mountaintop. It's to get to the mountaintop with as many people with me.
I love that.
And I think that's a very different energy. I've learned that it's pointless to try to prove anybody wrong. You need to be doing things for yourself, for your own personal reasons, and to prove yourself right. Because at the end of the day, the only person's opinion that really matters is yours. Nobody talks to you the amount that you talk to yourself. You're never hanging out with anybody more than you're hanging out with you. And so how important is that relationship and that conversation that you set up with yourself? So really learned that. I learned that we get to wake up every single day and participate in life, regardless of struggle, adversity, challenges. Gratitude was such a big theme on what we were doing. Doing something for a greater cause,
right?
Bigger than ourselves. We were raising money to free humans that are being sex trafficked.
Right.
On day 59, I was in a pretty bad bike.
Yeah.
Ended up cracking my L5 on that bike crash, and did 41 more Ironmans with a cracked L5 in incredible amounts of pain. And the lesson there is we get to choose where we put our focus and attention. I knew my suffering would end in 41 more days, but these individuals that are being sex trafficked have no idea when their suffering is going to end. And I look at that day 59, and I could have quit on that day, and I would have got to reset my own history. And nobody would have faulted me for saying, "Hey, I'm out. Day 60 is not going to happen." And they'd be like, "Hey, congratulations, great job."
Right.
But to that point, we'd only raised $250,000 for the cause. And because we chose to continue, we ended up raising $1 million.
Yeah. Wow. Huge.
So then the question quickly becomes, what is your greater cause and calling? What are you choosing to focus on? And if you quit on your journey today, who are you missing an opportunity to impact? Because it's not just yourself, because somebody's watching you, no matter who you are, how low you think you are on the totem pole, like somebody's watching you.
Is that the key then to, the term thrown around for what you do is kind of an endurance athlete, right? I like you, I'm born in Canada, never been on a road bike in my life. I was at the dentist 3 weeks ago, and they're like, "What do you want to watch on Netflix?" I'm like, "I don't know. While you're working on my teeth, put something that you suggest." And she's like, "Well, have you ever watched the Tour de France?" I'm like, "I don't even know what that is. So go ahead and turn it on." It sucked me in.
Okay, good. I was like, come on.
Yeah. And there's just so many interesting parallels. Like every coach who gets on there, everybody who talks at one of the interviews, they're always saying like, you just have to become friends with suffering. It's part of it, like as an endurance thing. There's so many great things where, I heard one of the guys say, he got in a big crash, and he goes, it's very much like life. Like in any other sport, if you crash, you bring in a substitute and they come in and take over for you. In the Tour de France, you crash, the peloton moves on, and you get your ass on the bike and you keep pedaling because no one's waiting for you. No one's like, it's on yourself. And like the general overall theme is in that last sprint for the sprinters, or the last little bit for the mountain hikes and the climbs there, it is enduring beyond what your mind tells you you can endure.
Oh.
You've told me that personally when we were talking about your Conquer 100 and whatnot. I think you've alluded to it, but I just want to be clear for people to understand what gets you through that is essentially your why. Like, what am I doing this for? And that why, does it have to be bigger than you in order for you to endure whatever, in this case, whatever life has to throw at you. But in the case of what you do, in the case of what the Tour de France riders do or whatever, there's got to be something that says when everybody and everything and even yourself is telling you to stop, you keep going. What is that allows someone to endure?
Yeah, so there's three things here real quick. One is you can't go from 0 to 100.
Yeah, good point.
And what you have to do is you have to start at the beginning, recognize you're the newest member, humble yourself, and do the work. And you're gonna gain knowledge and experience along the way. That's going to create small wins. It's going to create momentum to get you to the point where you now believe. Number one question I get around the world is, how do I become more mentally tough? And it's through showing up, having experiences. You can't listen to you and I rap. You can't go watch our documentary. You can't listen to my book. You can't listen to Goggins swear. You like none of these things. It's not going to do anything for you. That might be a spark, but you have to go have an experience in order for you to expand your mind, your belief system.
Yeah.
What was the original question?
Around endurance, what gets you through?
And I had three really good things.
We'll let them come back.
Can't go from 0 to 100. I cannot believe my brain is just.
That's okay. When it comes back, we'll come back. One thing I did want to ask you about, though, because like on day 101, you got him?
No, I'm frustrated that I don't got him.
Okay. On day 101, you couldn't really throw up your hands. This is after Conquer 100. You couldn't really throw up your hands and be like, oh, it's all done. I'm good now. Let's go have a cheeseburger and live life. Your recovery wasn't easy. Like, you pushed yourself beyond what any human has done before. Can you talk a little bit about the recovery process? Because everyone sees, oh, he did the 100. Everyone's happy. He raises his hands in the air. Now he gets to speak and do that. It wasn't an easy recovery. Like, your feet were busted up. Your brain didn't know like what the fuck to do because your brain kept telling you, James, stop. And you're like, I ain't stopping. And so it had to like catch up. What was recovery like?
Yeah, I think post 100 was harder than the 100. The 100 was 100 days, three plus months, and then it was over.
Yeah.
And then the real task started because it just showcases how powerful the mind and the body are. So my mind was protecting me from what my body was feeling.
Yep.
But then I believe I lost trust for my mind, and then it only tried to protect me because it no longer.
Yeah, right.
So my brain actually got stuck in hyperdrive, fight or flight, and I couldn't get to parasympathetic.
That's crazy.
So I was incredibly exhausted. I had brain fog all the time. I was confused. I was depressed. I was lethargic. I put on 30 pounds because you stop moving, but you're still consuming and you're depressed. And so you're doing all these things that you're not supposed to do that I fully understand. But I now have a lot more empathy for people that go through that. And so it was a very difficult 3-year journey because the general public, they move on to the next shiny, exciting,
right?
Trying to do something crazy and they love watching them suffer.
Right.
And so for me, it was just a really difficult journey. I had to go through multiple different therapies where they reset the neurological pathways of my brain. Just really, really deep work that I had to do. My brain thought I was always crashing, so my equilibrium and my spatial awareness was completely off.
Crazy.
All these different things.
Yeah.
Thankfully, we live in a day and age that's remarkable where we have access to these types of things. And I did. I got my brain fixed, and I feel amazing, and I've never felt better. In fact, I'm going to try to get back to the World Championships next year. I'm going to try to get back to my roots of racing, and I'm almost 50. But I drive again to be competitive.
Which is a great segue to the next question. It's like, so what does James do for, I don't know how to, like, personal work, right? Because I don't think there's any way, and I could be wrong, you tell me I'm wrong, that you could do what you do, have the mindset that you have, go after the things you're going after, to be on the road to speak, to do all these things, unless you have some level of self-care is not the right word, but like, back in the day for you is reading the Les Browns and listening to the cassettes and that sort of thing. When we were talking offline, when we were meeting in person, you told me about the support system your mom was and some of the beliefs that she had and she poured into you to help you heal. You talked about some of the psychedelic work you did to try to, what is part of, or what's important part of James's regimen to stay sharp, to have this mindset, to overcoming limiting beliefs. And I mean, did that come on the tail end of all this recovery, or did you always have that? But what's important that people should know about that aspect of life?
We're going to come back to that. It just came back to me.
Yes. Okay. You got it.
That you have to have. You have to have an ethos, and I'll explain what that is. And you have to have a bag of whys. Because your question was, why? How do you show up? You can show up, and your one why is enough. Your one why is not enough. So you have to have this bag of whys, and that's the culmination of all of your purposes and passions put into one. Because when I'll use day 59. I'm broken. I'm laying in the middle of the road. My back is broken. I don't know it yet. I was knocked unconscious, and I'm like, oh, what now? And if I had one why in that moment, I'd be like, screw you.
Not worth it, right?
And so then I got to reach back into the bag and I got to look at another one. I'm like, oh, okay, that's important. That's not enough for me to keep going. I reach in, I pull another one, and I'm six Y's in, and then I'm like, shit, okay. All of those together are enough for me to keep going. Now, if your journey that you're on is not significant or meaningful or impactful or whatnot, and you're just happy where you're at, great. You don't need a bag of Y's. You need one. That's going to get you up off the couch.
Sure.
But if you're trying to live your life and chase potential, like you're going to need a bag of Y's. And then in order to get through those moments when you're knocked out, laying unconscious, laying in the middle of the road, you have to have ethos. No decision in the history of decision has ever been made in the peak of emotion. And so if you're not prepared, if you haven't sat down, meditate and prepared and know what the answer is, you're going to make the wrong decision. And as I was coming back to consciousness, my wingman, Aaron, standing over top of me, and he knows what we stand for. He knows my ethos, and he rattled off some questions. And my answer to all of them were no, meaning I haven't finished what I started. I'm not doing this. I'm not reaching all these things. And the next words that came out of his mouth were, get back on your bike. It's time to ride. The answer to the questions were already answered. He was like, that's it. So you have to have a bag of whys. You can't go from 0 to 100. You have to have a bag of whys. And then
you need the ethos.
You need the ethos to keep you going. And so to follow up with that leads right into this question. How do you get to the moment where you want to have that belief system that you can do it, but then be, self-aware enough, because self-care has got to be the most important thing in terms of recovering from these events, recovering, keeping family life balance all in check, running a huge bit, like all of these things. People look at from the outside looking in, they're like, how on earth do you do everything that you do?
Yeah, exactly.
And like I do, it's like the people that we put around us and the team and showing up and being organized and having task lists and goals that we're driving towards and systems in place, all these things. That's what it takes. But yeah, I firmly believe that any physical ailment that we're having is attached to an emotional component. I think meditation is super important. I think grounding ourselves is massively important. I think sleep and great food is two of the greatest underutilized things that are right now. We're in the day and era of the grind society.
Yeah, right.
Technology. And I mean, I'm a huge proponent of working hard and grinding and showing up and taking accountability for what you're doing. That doesn't mean 4 hours of sleep for years and years and years on end. You have to, especially everything that I've learned with the brain, like you have to shut down, you have to take those moments, you have to take a step back and pause and meditate and analyze and do all these things. And so that's a huge part of our practice. I sleep 8, 9, 10 hours whenever I can. When I'm on the road, dude, it's 7 p.m. when I'm tired, lights out, cool down the room, try to get 11, 12 hours of sleep, like total reset time. I do red light therapy. I sleep in a hyperbaric chamber. Psychedelic journeys have been a huge part of my rebuilding my belief systems and perspective and the way that we handle situations, and the small things don't matter. And we get to choose where we put that focus and attention, all these things. Like to me, it's a medicine and a gift that's been put on this earth that is wrongfully classed at the moment.
Yeah.
And then just like, again, that deep meditation, doing that energy work, Yeah, all the woo-woo stuff. I love it, man.
I love it. And it sounds like I guess I already know
Ever think that someone like me that does what I do is like connected in that way. But to be honest with you, it's part of the secret to the success.
yeah, which is why I brought it up because I think people might not realize it and then now have a greater value for those things that matter. A couple more questions as we kind of wrap up. Majority of the people who are watching this are entrepreneurs. It's evident what lessons that you've pulled from all of this you've also used to build and grow the business that you currently have and are moving towards. Is there any one lesson or any one idea or concept or message that can be geared specifically to entrepreneurs? So not endurance athletes and not mindset folks, but just an entrepreneur that comes to mind from the mix of these two journeys for you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we get overwhelmed with the enormity of our dreams.
Right.
And it's really hard to start. So number one is just get started. And then focus on the only thing that you can control today. And if you take care of today, take care of tomorrow.
I love
And
that.
so really, as entrepreneurs, because trust me, I'm a serial entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, you have to have the ability to dream, but then you have to either put the right people around you that can framework your dream
Yep.
and conceptualize it. And then once you have that dream and be very specific with it, reverse engineer it until, the book, The One Thing.
Yep.
Reverse engineer it till you have the one thing all the time. And I always tell people, because people like they get overwhelmed, and especially in business, right? Because we're trying to wear so many hats in the early stages because we're bootstrapping, we got no funds, we're learning, we're trying to do web design and marketing and all these things on our own.
Yep.
And we get overwhelmed. And so for me, the greatest advice that I can give or was given was, okay, when you're stressing out and trying to do everything on your list in one day, in 1 hour, and you can't, just stop and take a step back and write down everything that's on your mind that's concerning you or worrying you. And then go back and cross out everything that you can't control. And you're going to end up with the one or two things that you need to be working on anyways. And so really that's my advice for entrepreneurs and what I've learned, right? It's the next pedal stroke. It's the next footstep. It's being so laser focused on the moment, knowing where the goal or destination is.
Yeah.
Being so laser focused on the moment. I have this concept that I talk about that's just be perfect for 1 second.
Huh.
And I don't care who you are,
Yeah.
where you are in your journey, anybody can put together a perfect second. And then if that's true, just start putting seconds together. Take time and take knowledge and experience to where all of a sudden you've got a perfect minute, a perfect 5, a perfect 10, a perfect hour, a perfect week, right? And then all of a sudden you're gaining those wins and the momentum. But we get so far ahead of ourselves and we're getting just so distracted that we're just spinning, being busy, doing nothing.
Yeah. Maybe we'll make this the last question. One of the last questions. I got one wrap up that I always use, but you're celebrating 24 years of marriage. That's an endurance sport as well. Sometimes full of suffering and wipeouts and all that. Not always and not for everyone all the time. What's the key to a successful marriage with all the kids and everything that you're going through 24 years later, celebrating it now? What's the key to that?
Yeah, love, communication, patience, forgiveness, all of those things.
All of the above.
It is a huge recipe. But again, it's being present in the moment, realizing what their needs are, trying to fulfill, and hopefully your partner wants to reciprocate that and be a participant in that back and forth flow. Understanding what their love language is super important.
Sure.
We all interpret and want and feel different things, and so understanding how they like to resolve conflict, how they like to navigate through their thought processes, things like that. Because ultimately you're two people that have joined lives, and then you bring other little people into it, and it just really becomes more difficult. And so for us, it's really been trying to communicate as best we can, trying to be as understanding as we can, showing up as much as we can for the other person, and understanding like I've got 5 kids. I love them and raise them all in their own way,
In their
right?
own separate way. Yeah.
And so you really have to become a good people person, a good problem solver, and the biggest problem is finding out how they love to learn, how they love to interact.
Right.
So and call it luck. I've got 5 great
You've done pretty good.
and I've got a great relationship with my wife. So
I love that. Is there anything you're afraid of? Love that. Okay. So one last question as we wrap up. But before we do, these are going to be people who just say, I need more James in my life. I need to figure out how to work with him, how to do all that. Where do we send them? Where's the best place people could go to learn about your newest book, to learn about all the old books, to learn about the documentaries, the coaching programs, your events that you throw on all the time? Where do they go to get all that?
Yeah, best place for that information is going to be ironcowboy.com. And then I'm most active on social media on Instagram, which is Iron Cowboy James. So anything that we're doing, anything we're up to, any racing or coaching or releases that we're doing anyways to participate with us in our community, Iron Cowboy James on Instagram and ironcowboy.com.
Love that. So here's we'll include that all in the show notes. Everybody make sure you at least give a follow, see what's up. Engage. I mean, even if you get that little inkling of a feeling to say, I need to figure this out, and I think James has got to do it, make sure you follow up on that process. Last question, James. We're pretending that we're at an awards banquet, something like the Emmys, which you're going to, or the Oscars. But you are the star here. You're going to be handed a Lifetime Achievement Award for everything you've done up until this point. What I want to know is, who do you thank and why? And I mean, outside of your family, because we know how important family is to you, but are there specific individuals that you can even name, colleagues, friends, mentors, whoever? Who would you thank? Who's on that short list and why?
Man, I'm gonna joke here for 2 seconds.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna quote Conor McGregor and say I'd like to take this opportunity to thank absolutely. Because at the end of the day, yeah, it's a team that does it, but as individuals, we have to show up, we have to grind, we have to do the work.
Sure, of course.
I love it when he did that. I remember exactly where I was when that happened. I think it's such an iconic. But for me, really, outside my wife and my kids and all those, because they're obviously massive inspirations and part of watch or read any of our stuff. We're family first. In fact, I don't want to be known for any of that stuff. I want to be known as the hero. But man, if I'm going to thank anybody, it's going to be outside of family. It's going to be the two wingmen. These two young men. Casey's a second grade school teacher. Aaron was working at a department store, and they just said, you know what? We'll come with you on the 50 and we'll give you everything we have. Wow. And fast forward to the 100, people, I'm the face of this thing, right? But if we take a step back for 1 minute, and let's just take a look at Aaron first, who did 112-mile bike rides with me by my side, watching my metrics, making sure I was safe. You want to put someone on your team, look for this attribute. When I crashed and we dusted ourselves off and made it back to that house, and you'll see this moment in the documentary. Yeah. Aaron's in tears. He's super emotional. And he says, I just did the audio reading of our book, and I'm bawling trying to read through this in our book. Oh. It's because it brought back so much memories. But Aaron, quote unquote, said that should have been me. Wow. I was just like, yeah, no, it shouldn't have been you, bro. Like you're doing everything you can. But that's the mentality he has. He's team first. What can I do to help us all win? Ended up doing 112 consecutive bike rides. That's insane. And then let's take Casey. Okay. Right. Casey is a 242 marathoner, phenomenal runner, loves to run, has 4 kids, is a second grade school teacher. Huh. He would wake up during the Conquer 100, and at 4:30 in the morning, he'd prep my stuff for the swim and be waiting for me poolside. I'd get in the water and he'd swim and lead me on the 2.4 miles. Then he'd go to school and teach kids. Yeah. So all day. And then he'd show up and run the marathon with me as my support. You talk about two young men that got nothing out of this other than the adventure, the camaraderie, like we're brothers. Yeah. And so if I, again, outside of family, if I'm thanking somebody, it's Casey and Aaron, those two wingmen.
I absolutely love that. Thanks, James. We've been talking to the baddest man on the planet, my opinion, James Lawrence, the Iron Cowboy. Remember, guys, you only have so many hours in a day, so the advice is always the same. Stop wasting them and focus only on what matters most, and that is the bottom line. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Bottom Line Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.